guys, today I'm going to read this book called Mrs. Roopy Is Loopy. And today, I'm just going to code it. I can see. Okay, and if you see here, I collect apple seeds, and this is apple seeds. I swear this is apple seeds. And I have 18 of them. 18 of these. Anyway, I'll show you why I show you guys why I have apple seeds. Because in this chapters it will be 4, 5, 6, and plus it's Dumbhead and Mrs. Roopy's Hero and Johnny Apple's Sauce. Chapter 4, Chapter 5, Chapter 6. Let's go to the video. Dun, dun, dun. Chapter 4, Dumbheads. Page number 19. I took a seat in the lunchroom next to Ryan and Michael. Ryan stuck 2 of my carrot sticks into his nose. I told him I'd give him a nickel if he ate them. He did too. Me, I won't even eat carrot sticks before you stick them into your nose. Do you think that guy was really George Washington? Ryan asked. I don't know, Michael said. What do you think, AJ? That's when Andrea Young leaned over from the next table and opened her big mouth. That wasn't George Washington, you dumbheads, she said. That was Mrs. Roopy wearing a powdered wig and a uniform. Army uniform. She may have been right, but I didn't want to admit it because I hate her. Ryan took out a dollar bill from his backpack and looked at the picture of George Washington. He sure looked like George Washington, Ryan said. George Washington has been dead for like 100 years, Andrea said. Even if George Washington was still alive, Emily said, I'm sure he would have more important things to do than come to our school and read us stories. That's when it hit me. If that army guy was really Mrs. Roopy dressed up as George Washington, maybe Mrs. Roopy isn't a librarian at all. Maybe she's just pretending to be a librarian, I said, just like she was pretending to be George Washington. Yeah, Michael said. Maybe she's a kidnapper and she's got a real librarian locked up in an empty warehouse at the edge of the town. I saw that in a movie once. We got to save her, Emily said with tears dribbling down her cheeks. Then she went running out of the room. There was only one way to solve the problem. We cleaned off our trays and went back to our classroom to ask Miss Daisy if George Washington was really Mrs. Roopy in disguise. Don't be silly, Miss Daisy said. As it turns out, Mrs. Roopy is absent today. She's homesick in bed. It must have been the real George Washington. But what does Miss Daisy know? Everybody knows Miss Daisy is crazy. Chapter 5, Mrs. Roopy's hero. Page number 24. Everybody in our class was excited before the next library period. We all wanted to see if George Washington would be there again. When we got to the library, there was just this lady who looked a little bit like George Washington, except she didn't have an army uniform or a wig. She looked like a normal lady. "Good morning, second graders," she said. My name is Mrs. Roopy. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there here the other day for you library period. "But you are here," Ryan shouted. "You must be mistaken." Mrs. Roopy said I was homesick in bed. "Can we see your wooden teeth again?" Michael asked. "Yeah, can we?" Wooden teeth? Did you know that George Washington didn't have wooden teeth at all? His mouth was filled with cow's teeth. "Ew!" we all shouted. I asked Mrs. Roopy, "Did the cow have George Washington's teeth in her mouth?" "But that was you, wasn't it, acting like George Washington?" said Michael. Mrs. Roopy's forehead got all wrinkly, just like George Washington did. George Washington's did when we told him about computers. "I don't know what you're talking about." We all looked at one another. I wasn't sure if she was telling the truth or not. If I were George Washington, would I have death? Mrs. Roopy asked. Then she picked up her shirt and showed us her belly, and she had a little tattoo of a heart right over her belly button. It was cool. I had to admit that George Washington would never have a heart-shaped tattoo over his belly button. So maybe that army guy with the wig wasn't Mrs. Roopy after all. "Let me show you around the library," Mrs. Roopy said. Did you know that books can take you places you have never been before? They helped us explore our world. We have books here on just about every subject you can think of. This is the fiction section. Does anyone know the difference between fiction and non-fiction books? Non-fiction books are books that are not fiction, Ryan said, because not non-fat milk has no fat in it, and nonsense has no sense in it. Michael added. That's true, Mrs. Roopy said, but there's a little more to it. Fiction is what you get when you rub two things together, I said. Everybody laughed, even though I didn't say anything funny. That's friction, AJ, said Andrea Young said. Fiction is a made-up story, and non-fiction is based on fact. That's correct, said Miss Roopy, and she smiled at Andrea. I wish Andrea would shut up. Oh, who cares what the difference between fiction and non-fiction is? I said, all books are boring. Everybody went, ooh, like I had said something really terrible. But everybody needs to know how to read, AJ, Mrs. Ruby said. Not me, I said. When I grow up, I'm going to be a trick bike rider because you don't have to know how to read it to do tricks on a bike. Yeah, me too, said Michael and Ryan. We told Miss Ruby that every day after school, me and Michael and Ryan ride our bikes together. I learned how to ride a two-wheeler in kindergarten. Now I can do a bunny hop off a bump. I know the names of all the famous trick bike riders. I have posters of them all over the walls of my room. Geez, I don't know much about bicycle tricks, AJ, Mrs. Ruby said, but I've got posters of my hero on my wall at home too. Who is your hero? Mrs. Ruby, Andrea asked. Melville Dway. Melville Dway? I asked. Melville Dway was a very famous librarian, said Mrs. Ruby, he said, and her eyes got all bright and sparkly and excited. Librarians aren't famous, I said. Melville Dway was, said Mrs. Ruby. He invented a number system. The number system we use to find books in the library. If it weren't for Melville Dway, we would never be able to find anything. Wow, Andrea Young said, as if she was really interested in that boring stuff. So, if you want to find books about insects, you'd go to number 595, Mrs. Ruby said. And if you want to find books about dinosaurs, you'd go to number 567. Libraries all over the world use the system that Melville Dway invented. Today we call it the Dway decimal system. Did all the kids in school make fun of him because his name was Melville? I asked. I know that if there was a kid named Melville in our school, we would make fun of him constantly. I don't know, Mrs. Roopy said, but would you like to hear a song I made up about Melville Way? Yeah! We all shouted. Listening to songs had to be better than reading books. Mrs. Roopy went into her office and came back with a guitar and one of those harmonica thingies you wear around your neck. She strummed a few chords to warm up. You may have heard folktale about John Henry, the steel-driven man, Mrs. Roopy said. Well, this is the story of Melville Way, the book sorting man. And then she started to sing. When Melville Way was a little bitty baby, the first words he said to himself were, "I've got to get those books off the floor and put them on the shelf." Mrs. Roopy sang the whole song and played her guitar and harmonica too. It was a pretty cool song. This Melville Way guy had a race with a computer to see who could sort books the fastest. Melville won the race, but right after he sorted the last book, he dropped dead right on the floor of the library. It was cool. At the end of the song, Andreon got up and gave Mrs. Roopy a standing ovation, so we all had to get up too. That's the saddest story I ever heard in my life, Emily said, wiping tears from her eyes. At the end of the period, Mrs. Roopy asked us if we had any questions about how to use the library. Is it true that if we don't return out the library books on time, you lock us in a dungeon under the school? I asked. Everybody laughed, even though I didn't say anything funny. Don't be silly, Mrs. Roopy said. The dungeon is on the 3rd floor. I think she was telling a joke, but I'm not sure. Chapter 6, Johnny Applesauce. Page number 38. When we came into the library the next time, a guy with a long beard came down the ladder from the treehouse. Wearing blue gym overalls, he was carrying a shovel and a big sack. He had no shoes on his feet, but he was wearing a pot on his head. He looked funny, and he looked a lot like Mrs. Roopy to me. Mrs. Roopy, why are you wearing a pot on your head? I asked. Roopy? The guy said in a funny voice. You young'uns must be confusing me with some other feller name. My name is Johnny Applesauce. Appleseas. It's the year 1800. I travel from town to town, planting apple trees most everywhere. I wonder. You're you are not Johnny Appleseed, Andrea called out. You are Mrs. Roopy. Ain't never heard of no Roopy, the guy said, making his forehead all wrinkly. Appleseed's the name. Planting apple tree is my game. This here's a darn big country, and I reckon folks are gonna need a heap of apples. No matter what we said, we couldn't convince the bearded guy with the pot on his head that he wasn't Johnny Seed. He read us a story about Johnny Appleseed and told a lot of stuff about apples. Did you know that folks have been eating apples for thousands of years? Johnny Apple told us. They should chew fast, Appleseed told us. They should chew faster, I said. Everybody laughed. Then Johnny Appleseed took us outside and helped us plant a real apple tree near the playground. Before we went back to school, we had apples for snack. I can understand why he planted all those apple trees. I can understand why he was dressed funny, but I couldn't why. What I don't understand is why he wore a pot on his head. That Johnny Applesauce guy was weird. Then when we got back to class, I told Miss Daisy all about what happened during library period. Do you still think books are boring, AJ? She asked me. Yes, I said. If you like this video, please just like, subscribe. Bye. Wait, my hand.